this exciting session on mastering open source with expert insights and best practices. This event is a part of Hacktoberfest, and we have got a very special speaker today, Mr. Aditya Oberai, who will be sharing his expertise with us. And my name is Shiven Vasan. I'll be hosting today. So this event is brought to you in collaboration with several GDGs across the country, starting with our own GDG Amity, whose team lead is Kanchan Rai. We are excited to have partnered with several other communities. GDG UMIT Mumbai, led by Shreya K. Sarkar, GDG MAIT Delhi, led by Rohit Goyal, GDG Jamia Hamdard, South Delhi, led by Afifa Kamal, GDG Nirma University Ahmedabad, led by Sneha Singh. A big shout out to all the leads and their teams for their efforts in making this event possible. So, today's session is all about mastering open source contributions, from forking repositories to pushing code and repeating the process to build the expertise. Mr. Aditya will walk us through practical steps and strategies. Make sure you stay engaged throughout the session and feel free to ask any questions in the chat box. So let me first now introduce our speaker for the evening, Mr. Aditya Oberai. Sir is currently a developer advocate at Appwrite, but some of you may already know him as an alumnus of Amity Noida and the former DSC lead for our campus, which is now GDG. He is also recognized as Microsoft MVP, Most Valuable Professional, and CMX Community Professional of the Year 2024. No doubt, he is well-known figure in the developer and open source community, and his example is still given to us by our teachers. So, without further ado, let's dive right into the session. Aditya, sir, the stage is all yours.
Thanks a lot, Shivain. Just a quick question before I go forward. Am I audible? Okay. That got a few flashbacks. I mean, I remember being involved with our GDSC, as it used to be called at one point of time, and I'm both happy and surprised that that example is still coming up from faculty. We should talk stories sometime else about that era of Amity. But anyway, hi everyone. Hope you're all doing well. I'm really happy and excited to be here, catching up with you all, chatting with you all. By the way, we didn't drop the sir. No need for that. Aditya's good. All right. And just before we jump into what I'll be talking about Hacktoberfest and how to contribute, I want to say that we're going to stay active in the chat. I do have a presentation, but I'll try and get through it so we can spend some more time chatting, taking up your questions, having more of a discussion, because it makes more sense for me to be helping you all figure out what you're facing problems with, right? So yeah, I think with that said, that's just one thing I wanted to mention. Now, coming to my presentation and discussion today, I think a number of us are aware of what Hacktoberfest is. If not, that's something we'll be touching upon slightly later on as well. But we've got a few problems that we've come across Hacktoberfest over the years. This is basically my fifth Hacktoberfest participating, probably fifth or sixth or seventh, I don't know. Been around for a lot of Hacktoberfests now. My company, we partnered with Hacktoberfest formally for 3 years. Over from 2021 to 23. And so I've had a lot of opportunities to look at how Hacktoberfest has operated, how the community has interacted, and we all observed a few different problems. So for this particular talk, what we're going to be discussing more is what not to do in Hacktoberfest, and some of the pitfalls of kind of rushing in to contribute, right? Because a lot of problems come up simply because a lot of us are new to this. It's not because we want to be malicious, but there is a big challenge with how education around open source and Hacktoberfest has been over the last few years. So hopefully this particular talk will help share some of the pitfalls of rushing into Hacktoberfest as well. And it'll discuss how you can contribute in a healthy manner. So I think my intro is already done. Um, that was a really cool intro in general. Currently, I work as a developer advocate at Appwrite, and yeah, if someone does want to catch up with me, my Twitter is probably the easiest place to do so. I've thrown the link in the chat. That'll get you to my Twitter probably. It's a little short link. If it doesn't work, let me know. Other than that, you can follow some of my work on GitHub if you'd like to do that as well. Now, coming to Hacktoberfest, in case there is someone who isn't aware at this point of time, which is totally all right, by the way, but in case you aren't, Hacktoberfest is pretty much the largest celebration of open source in the world. It's been around for over a decade now. This is the 11th edition of Hacktoberfest we've been in. Um, it is an initiative that was started by folks at DigitalOcean, and they've been running it wonderfully for a while now, right? So if you've not yet had a chance to take a look at it, hacktoberfest.com is the website. I've shared it in the chat as well, and you can go and check it out. It'll tell you basically everything you need to know about the story of Hacktoberfest, and at least help you get registered and started for the same. Now, as lovely as this initiative is, it hasn't been without its problems. Now, when I say this, this isn't a problem that Hacktoberfest has caused, but over the few years, because Hacktoberfest has basically become a time when a lot of newcomers enter open source in general, it's because there's not been enough education about healthier practices. It's also led to a few different issues, which have led to a number of incidents, particularly. Um, and the fundamental reason for this is that too many new contributors have rushed into open source and Hacktoberfest for all the wrong reasons. Now, when we talk about wrong reasons, right, it basically refers to stuff like, okay, like I'm gonna need you to be active in the chat with me, but how many of you have ever heard someone tell you contribute to open source and you'll get a job? Has anyone ever heard that, for example?
I have heard that.
You heard that? Yeah. Um, Stuff like that, it's not entirely wrong, but it's created a whole problem, right? Because people don't talk about how it helps, just that it helps. And when people put a blanket statement like that, it just leads to people rushing in without realizing what they're doing, why they're doing it, and it creates a lot more problems for everyone else in open source as well, which has resulted in incidents. I think one of the most iconic ones in recent times was what happened with Express.js, where a certain YouTube channel basically showed how to create a pull request. They were teaching Git and GitHub, and their example was to add a name into the README of Express.js, which is one of the biggest repositories, not just in the JavaScript ecosystem, but in the world. And they gave a disclaimer on why you shouldn't, forget why, they just gave a disclaimer that you shouldn't do this in a big public repository after they showed the demo, and by then 1,000 plus PRs had been created. 1,000 plus PRs adding their names into the README of one of the biggest open source repositories in the world. And not just a repository, one of the biggest JavaScript frameworks in the world. That is a massive problem, right? In the past, Hacktoberfest itself had a very, very major problem as well. Um, People started spamming PRs on every second repository they saw just for a piece of swag. And what that started doing was that you had projects which wouldn't get activity all throughout the year, um, or consistent lower amounts, right, relatively. But for example, if there's a project which gets relevant PRs about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a month, and then suddenly has 25, 30 more PRs in a week, that aren't always relevant either. That aren't actually always beneficial. It's just people making random little edits and changes just for the sake of making an edit and a change. You resulted with maintainers, users, actual contributors getting burnt out, right? The hiring advantage issue. People say that open source is going to help you get a job. They don't tell you how, right? What you need to even do to be discovered. Now, yes, open source will help you get a job, but the reason that happens is because open source is a great way for you to show your skills as a developer or as an engineer in a public forum, right? But when someone tells you that just do open source and you'll get a job and you put 25 typo fixes, that's not representing your ability as a developer. I'm not saying it's a bad update. It does help projects, but then people start forcing PRs where they aren't needed, um, just for the sake of getting green squares on their GitHub to show that they're an open source contributor when that may not even mean anything, right? That work may not actually make any difference. So all of this creates a lot of community burnout. It creates a lot of ruckus. It interferes with the actual operations of projects, which is also against what Hacktoberfest stands for. The idea behind Hacktoberfest has always been to create more exposure for open source projects, to help them discover new contributors who are actually relevant to these projects, and to allow them to scale their audience and platforms. And it's done that successfully. That's the reason Appwrite exists today. That the place where I work, we would not have been where we are without Hacktoberfest, right? So with that said, I actually recently compiled a personal lists of don'ts, things that you absolutely should not do as you enter Hacktoberfest. The first one I had was don't try to contribute to every project you come across. Um, Too many people rush into every random project they find in GitHub to get a minimum number of PRs for Hacktoberfest, right? I think it's 4 PRs and you get digital badges for that right now. It used to be t-shirts at one point. Right now, there's digital badges, and some companies and organizations also have their own programs where they'll give out their own swags. Um, but if you just start rushing into every random project, it's not going to make a difference. Like I said, Hacktoberfest primarily is about getting open source projects the visibility and support. And you really don't need to rush to 100 different projects and try them out. The best way to make an impact is by selecting projects that you actually use, or projects that you actually are interested in, or ones that align with your skills, right? That's where you can make a difference, where you can have a higher quality of contribution. Going to every second repo you see isn't going to help for sure. Next, don't rush to contribute before you understand a project, right? Lots of projects are massive, they have a lot of intricacies, they have different processes. Before you jump in and make your first contribution, you need to take time to actually understand how these projects work, which means you need to go through their documentation, you need to go through their code base, you need to maybe try it out, set it up, see how all these moving parts actually function together. One of the best ways to do this is actually to look at the contribution guide or the README of a project, which will be in the readme.md file or the contributing.md file in a repo. And these usually define the processes, tech stack, code quality guidelines, um, contribution guidelines of a project. All of these are defined usually in these two files. And sometimes projects will have a larger documentation for this as well. So you need to spend time understanding these projects before you start contributing. Avoiding low quality or spam PRs. Now, as we've talked about relevance of project and understanding these projects, it's also necessary to understand that the contributions or pull requests you make add objective value to a project. Now, there's a way to understand what objective and subjective value or contributions mean in the context of open source projects. Like, let's take an example. You've got a project README that you've looked at, and you saw that there were a few spelling mistakes in it. Spelling mistakes by the dictionary, I mean. Um, Fixing spelling mistakes in the documentation will objectively be valuable to everyone who reads the documentation, because yes, a lot of people who may be reading this documentation aren't originally English readers, or you know projects translate their documentations in different languages as well to make them more accessible. There are benefits to it. It will objectively add equal value to everyone. Forcefully adding comments to a file may not. Projects may have, like, it might add value to some people, it might not add value to a lot of other people, right? And so that's where objective and subjective value comes into place. Is that, is it creating value for everyone in the community or just a small group of people? If it's creating value for everyone, that's objective value. If it's, and you're going to figure that out in the sense that you're going to have a dilemma as to whether it affects every single person or not if you think about what change you're making. So please avoid low quality or spam PRs. That's something very important to keep in mind. And by the way, if you do make those PRs, you can get banned from Hacktoberfest forever today. They have a process in place for that, that was brought in because these issues became prevalent. Keeping that in mind, start by tackling smaller issues before you jump onto the larger ones. There is no point in taking up the largest issue in a project as your first issue before you've even tried contributing, because you're going to confuse yourself along the way, and there's a high chance it will discourage you from open source entirely. It does happen. This is not something new. Each project has a certain level of like, they have a variety in what levels of issues they're tackling. Some of these are going to be easier, and projects do mark these as good first issues as well. You can find these because they have the label on it. You can filter on GitHub by these as well, by the way. So please, when you're contributing to a project, if they have good first issues and you're new to the project, start there. Don't just jump to the biggest or the latest or the largest problem that this project might have before you've even tried it out. Get there eventually. It's not to say that you can't do it later, but don't start there. No AI generated PRs, please. This has become such a big issue lately. Um, because we've now got stuff like ChatGPT and Cloud and Copilot and all of these tools now. A lot of people, what they're just doing is they're looking at these issues, giving some prompts to one of these code generators, and yeah, submitting those. And what happens there is that these PRs are often untested, they contain mistakes, because LLMs aren't perfect. And even the LLM companies acknowledge that, right? But people just create these for the sake of it, that maybe someone's going to be stupid enough to accept those, and people really are smarter than that. It just wastes everyone's time, though. So it's not a bad thing to use AI tools, just don't be irresponsible and um, just submit anything random that you've generated from one of these. Don't barge into issues that have already been assigned. A lot of projects, what happens is that they're going to have their list of issues on GitHub, and they will assign these to someone. When you're in Hacktoberfest, you've got a lot of people joining in. Organizations and repos will assign issues so that they know who's working on something. If an issue is assigned, please do not start creating a PR for the same issue. And before you start working on a problem, make sure you're assigned to it. Because what's going to happen is that if you do not check whether an issue is assigned, or if it's already assigned and you start working on it, you're going to be doing double the amount of work because someone else is doing the same work. It creates a headache for maintainers, it creates a headache for the other contributor, and chances are you're just going to get rejected because, well, you did something, you did someone else's work. And so if they were assigned, they did the work, you did the work, you're just getting rejected by default. So you're doing unnecessary work there as well. There's enough work for people to do in open source. Open source needs more people regardless. Please make sure you work on stuff you're actually assigned to and not stuff that someone else is. Important notes that way: please don't disregard feedback sent your way. Um, One of the most amazing things about open source is that, right now you're in college, you might be 18, 19, 20, 21 or something. You could very well be talking to a person halfway around the world with more experience than your age. I say that one from experience. I had someone in my team who had more than, like, I was 22, they had been writing code for more time. So open source really enables that for everyone. You could very well get that sort of an experience. And so just because you don't know who they are, where they're coming from, doesn't give you any right to disregard feedback coming your way. If someone shares that feedback, respond humbly, understand why feedback is being shared. Sometimes people are unreasonable, and in that case, you're allowed to justify yourself, but be logical, be reasonable, do not just, well, rush in for the sake of saying something. Now, this is very Hacktoberfest specific. Some of those other points were more open source oriented as well, but Hacktoberfest now has repos that are eligible to participate in. In the start, this wasn't the case, but over the years, the Hacktoberfest team noticed that because Hacktoberfest creates a ruckus for a lot of maintainers, they allowed maintainers to opt in or out of Hacktoberfest. So any repo that is actually a part of Hacktoberfest will have the Hacktoberfest topic on it. So will the labels. The labels will probably also have a Hacktoberfest label, but either way, that topic is going to be there regardless. So keep an eye out for the Hacktoberfest topic on these repos. You can go to GitHub and filter repos based on this topic as well to help you understand which projects are a part of this or not. And please don't start looking at projects without this topic and trying to contribute to them and then trying to force maintainers to add the topic because you made a PR and it doesn't count for your list of numbers. That's not their prerogative. They don't have any obligation to opt into Hacktoberfest. So if you're doing this just for Hacktoberfest, look at projects that are actually a part of Hacktoberfest. And please do not participate solely for the rewards. This is the most important point in this list of don'ts. Hacktoberfest has always been about learning and getting immersed in open source, about creating meaningful work and creating value. Like, you have an open opportunity to support and participate in some of the most impactful software in the world. That's what open source gives you. Like, forget on Earth, we've got open source code running on the Mars rovers. It's literally on multiple planets at this point. And so that's what Hacktoberfest is opening the doors for. Um, Contribute to open source projects with the aim of actually making a difference rather than getting a PR count. That number of PRs doesn't mean anything to anyone. We're not going to care if you had 100 PRs versus 70, 50, 20. What we're going to be looking at is what you did on those 20 or what you did in those 100. It doesn't matter that number. So please focus on actually creating value. With that said, I actually have a list of healthy contribution practices you can indulge in as well when you're contributing to a PR. Some of these points might have overlapped, but that's all right. These are actually practices we've followed and kept in mind for Appwrite as well. So, like I said just a little earlier, waiting till you're assigned an issue, that's always a good thing to do. Always helps a lot. Simply because projects will select who's working on what issue, right? And you don't want to repeat someone else's work. Making objectively valuable contributions, we talked about that, about what subjective and objective value is. Focus on quality rather than quantity. We don't need 100 PRs. We'd rather have one great one than 100 unnecessary ones. Reviewing previously merged contributions. Now, this is a very underrated way of looking and understanding how open source projects operate. When you're new to a project, and that point, you might start figuring out how a project is functioning, but you don't know how maintainers review, how they communicate, what code quality practices might need to be followed, what um, caveats and what issues to, or rather what pitfalls and what edge cases to look around, how to even look for them. All of that is something you can learn by looking at other merged contributions or pull requests, because they will show how people write code, how they submit their code, how maintainers review, what kind of things they keep an eye out for. And this actually makes it a lot easier to integrate within the operations of the project. Calling dibs on issues, please do not do that. There's enough work to go around for everyone. You don't need to enter on one day, you found, and you don't go to 100 different issues and be like, I want to be assigned this issue, I want to be assigned that's not going to happen. You can't be assigned to 100 issues at the same time and fulfill them at the same time, right? Focus on one or two, solve them, then move forward. You don't need to go to 100 and start calling dibs. um, Waiting for a couple of days before you ask for an issue to be reassigned. Another very, very important thing. Now, one thing that happens sometimes in open source projects is that you might have an issue assigned to someone and they may not have an immediate submission or a pull request to that. Right? I know sometimes we're expected that if you're assigned, we need to rush it. But here's the thing to remember: most people, when they participate in open source, um, they right? You've got this person, they've got their job, they've got their families, they've got their chores at home, they've got their responsibilities otherwise, and then they get time for open source. It's not always something they can do as a part of their work. It's a privilege if you're able to do that, right? And so you need to be patient with people. If there's an issue that you're passionate about, that they didn't have an answer to in the 5 minutes um, that have been since they were assigned, please be patient. Wait for a few days, ask if they were able to make any progress. If they were able to make progress, then again wait, see that they're doing the work. If they still want, then you can potentially have a conversation if you need to take over. But don't rush in and do that. Give people the space to work and participate, because there's a high chance you're going to need that space someday as well. Communicating your progress with maintainers, again, very important. After you're assigned an issue, keep updating the project maintainers at regular intervals about what you've done, what you're working on, where you're getting stuck. This way everyone can track progress, what problems you're facing. It helps keep transparency within the community, and if you're stuck, someone can jump in and help out. It keeps the project moving and pushing forward. Just as you're patient with people giving you feedback, other contributors, be patient with maintainers, please. Like I said, most open source work is unpaid, voluntary. People do it outside their day-to-day lives and simply because they actually love these projects and this tech and their communities. And as enjoyable as it is, communities around these projects can become massive, and it is very, very overwhelming at times, right? um, so be respectful, be kind to your maintainers. They are really looking out for the best of the projects, and that means looking out for the best of the contributors. So be respectful and be patient. By the way, once you're actually contributing a little more, you can also help out with pull request reviews. um, this is because most projects tend to have a much higher ratio of contributors and maintainer as compared to maintainers. And once you understand how maintainers review and share feedback, you could actually start helping out a little bit as well. It's also a great way to grow into a maintainer, but it's a good thing to do for the community. It's a good way to contribute back and give and accept feedback constructively and humbly. That's always going to be a major repeated point, something that I emphasize a lot on. And that is because you have no idea who you're collaborating and working with. Being constructive just makes sure that everyone learns and grows from this experience, and that is learning which will actually practically help you in your professional careers as you go forward. So yeah, please keep in mind that when we talk about Hacktoberfest is a celebration of open source. A lot of the points I shared are more focused on open source, and that is because open source has a lot more to it than Hacktoberfest. This is something you will probably come across and get to think more about as you participate in Hacktoberfest. But just remember that open source is a much larger breed, and just because you start with Hacktoberfest doesn't mean your work in open source has to stop right now. That's something you can continue working on as you go forward as well. Now, for all the stuff that I've discussed, I actually have a few resources I wanted to share. Um, Firstly, the points that I had on what not to do during Hacktoberfest, it's something I wrote a blog on. I am sharing a link for that in the chat. You can also scan this page if you'd like. You can read this blog. It's definitely going to help you get some, like, it'll reiterate a lot of what I've discussed. I additionally wrote a separate blog on what healthy open source contribution practices look like. So if you want to learn more about that, spend some time reviewing these practices. There is another blog that I am sharing here. I am sharing a link in the chat. You can go through it, read it, take your time. Both of these blogs are going to be handy to read, by the way. So feel free to revisit them whenever you need to. And if you are participating in Hacktoberfest this year, by the way, we're actually running a Hacktoberfest hackathon. So um, if you want to build something, join us. We'd definitely love to have you around. It's hackathon itself has actually grown really big. We've now got over, I think, 4,000 registrants on this. But that being said, any project that grows massive just because you've got a lot of registrants doesn't mean 4,000 people are submitting. So it still gives pretty good odds for anyone who'd like to participate and join. And we do have a few prizes for the winners of the hackathon. So yeah, definitely would love to see you all participate there. That would be great. And I think with that, I am probably at the end of my presentation. Now I'd love to open up, the chat here. If anyone has any questions, anything you all want to talk about, I am happy to have a chat. I've shared a link for the hackathon in the chat, Harpreet. You can check it out.
If you guys have any questions, you can drop it in the chat, and Aditya would love to take your questions.
I think Aruna has a question. How did I choose a project as a beginner? Honestly, some of these things are things I made mistakes at myself as well. But what I did was I eventually, as I understood things, I started looking at projects around that were trying to accept contributions for tech I worked around. Um, or I actually collaborated with friends and developed open source projects that we could put out, and we all collaborated together to build some stuff. That's also something we did. Um, I used places like there are websites which help categorize good first issues and so on. And I looked at some of these projects or documentation of tech that I worked on, and I looked for issues in a number of these. Lots of organizations do actually prepare open lists of good first issues. So I seek those out in tech that I had experience with, and then I built a number of my own projects along the way, which folks I was collaborating with folks on. So that kind of helped out.
Hi, I also had a question.
Yeah.
I read that you were part of MLH.
Hmm.
So, what exactly were you part of, and how did you get there? I was really excited when I read that.
So I was a part of the MLH coaches program, which is a program that for people basically who support their hackathon league. So I was particularly involved in the management and the running of first party hackathons, which MLH runs on their own. And I was an active speaker across the global Hack Week events. I collaborated and I supported events that were joining the league. So if you're a member event, right, of the MLH hackathon season, they always have representatives at events who are involved helping organizers. They help manage judging, they review for MLH prizes, and all of they'll be speakers, they'll run a mini event, activities like that. So that's stuff I was doing, and it wasn't a voluntary activity, by the way. It was a contractual role. So for that, you do have to be an active community leader, an active hackathon organizer, potentially someone with that set of experiences, and they do have a fairly rigorous application process. You have an application with essay-like questions, which is followed by multiple interviews, and then they accept you in.
That's great.
What I see a question in the chat. What to do if project maintainers are inactive and take a lot of time to review PRs? Okay, when you say a lot of time, what does that mean? Because for some people that could mean a week, for some people that could mean a month, for some people that could mean a day. And here's how I'd look at inactivity. It's one thing if they haven't replied to your PR. It's another if the project is dead. And what that means is that the project has not been receiving contributions or accepting anything for a while. So is the project dead as well, or just that your PR has not received a response? Because I look at both of those factors first.
Actually, I remember I opened a PR last year and it never got merged because the project became dead. And yeah, I had also the same issue because the PR
So
was taking a lot
if
of
you know the
time.
project has entirely not stopped operating, then that of course is something you just can't do anything about. Move on to a
Yeah,
different project is what I'll say at that point. If the project isn't dead and you're seeing that your PR isn't getting a review, a week is a good point of time. You could just send in a message tagging whoever your maintainer is, asking if it could get a review, or if the project has an active community, you could ask more about that there as well.
yeah.
How can Hacktoberfest help you network with other developers or members of the open source community? You go to a project that you're interested in, on a tech that you work in, you find other contributors, collaborate with them, discuss on issues, have a chat with them. Why not? Right? You could always interact. But here's the thing about networking. Um, if your definition of networking is having a connection request on LinkedIn, that's not gonna help you. It doesn't make a difference. If you wanna go ahead, collaborate with people, you can do that by joining on their PRs, having discussions with them, talking about issues. You could join the communities of these projects and interact with these people as well. Right? That's a way of interacting. But if it's about get like it's got not like that's what matters. That's how I would define it. If you're thinking of defining it as meeting and connecting with other people on LinkedIn, that's not gonna happen. What's the best way to get started as a beginner? Find a good first issue in a project that you're interested in. That's what it means. So, Harpreet, when Hacktoberfest says that they have an option for non-code contributions, what that refers to is that some projects also have the option to accept contributions around advocacy, around like blogs and stuff, or uh, to take design feedback or stuff like documentation edits. But the thing here is that it is on the project maintainers to open up these contributions. Um, Hacktoberfest supports people doing this, but that doesn't mean every project will automatically accept these um, contributions. So it's gonna be a project by project thing. Can I mention when will Hacktoberfest start? It runs for the whole of October. So it started on the 1st of October and it'll end on the 31st. It's been running for 2 weeks now. What sort of resources are we talking about getting started with open source contributions? Because I mean, I just told a set of good practices, right? Um, what are you actually looking for when you say some good resources on getting started with Hacktoberfest or open source contributions? Because, like, I mean, if you want to, what does resources mean here is my question. It absolutely is intimidating, which is why I said you want to start with a project that's relevant to your interest areas or something that you actually care about, right? Start by going to one of these projects and start by interacting within their communities. Because what's going to happen is if you're going to Google this question, you're going to find enough blogs giving enough gyan, um, similar to what I've just done right now for the last half an hour, 40 minutes. But it's going to be the same stuff again and again and again, and it's not going to help you. The only way it really happens is you go and to a project and you actually start talking to people there and figuring out how you can help them, and then you start helping them. That's the only way this works.
Yeah. So I had another question. What if the project that we want to contribute to has a large tech debt and we spot an issue, but we know ourselves that nothing can be done now because they have such a huge tech debt that they need to, if resolve this issue, we need to change this, and to fix this, we need to change this, and so on. What do we do in that state? Do we do all those
Start the
things?
conversation. Start a conversation. You don't know what they're willing to do and not do unless you start the conversation, right? Moreover, tech debt is a consequence of decisions, right? Some decisions can be undone, some decisions can't be undone. But either way, so a certain amount of debt can also be lived with. So start a conversation, see what people in the community think, see what maintainers think, and if the maintainers eventually decide that it's something, or the community in general votes for changing this, you could help play a part in helping fix that and sort that all out. But it starts by beginning that conversation.
Okay.
The thing about open source is it's we talk about it all about how you can contribute code and make a difference, but it everything in open source runs on communication. That's the basis of it all. So communicate as much as you can. That's what we're all doing essentially, and that's what keeps open source moving.
I have a question as well. So the from the perspective of a project maintainer, so if I am
Mhm.
maintaining a project, what are some of the qualities that I should be looking in a PR? Because I have seen personally that there are many spam PRs across a project, and some maintainers approve some PRs, they don't, while they don't approve others. So, like, what are some of the things that we should be keeping in mind?
Um, what I do here is that, like again, this comes down to each project. Some projects will have stricter guidelines, some not. Are you a maintainer of a project? Is my question.
No, but I am thinking of becoming, making one of my projects
Does the
open source.
project have a different another set of maintainers already? Is it an
No,
old project or is it something you're starting?
it's something that I'm going to start.
I see. So ideally, what I'd do as a maintainer there is I'd want to define certain processes. Like, let me actually change what I'm sharing on my screen. Um, and I'm gonna change and open up Appwrite's repository here. Okay. and I'll just look at our contributing guide. So here's what we do with our contributing guide. Um, we will define how to submit a pull request. We define how to name and structure branches. We will talk about when you need to run your linter and formatting. We define how to set up the project. Similarly, we've defined our architecture and our tech stack. We define code standards, what we follow, and so on. Right? We'll define practices for creating and running tests. That is something we define. So processes for communication, processes for um, testing, processes for maintenance. These are the minimums you need to set up, right? And every major repository is going to have this. Like, I'm going to just go up to GitHub right now. Um, they usually have an explore section, right? And I open any repo that we find here. Okay, so let's look at the Coolify documentation. They have a contributing guide. And when you look at this, they're going to teach the setup steps, as I said already. They're going to teach you the processes of what to do to create a contribution within this repo. They tell you where to install dependencies, how to do that, all of these things. It's about communicating these processes, right? So you start by defining the processes that you will be reviewing for here. Because
Oh,
when you review, you're going to be checking for all of these things. Whether they did actually test this out on their own, whether they created the contribution in the specific directory that you needed them to. All of these things are things you're communicating in a way to educate, and they'll help you reverse engineer what they're actually looking for as well, right? So if they've defined that you need to edit or create a file within this directory, and then someone's created it within one of these other ones, then you know what you're looking for. Look at examples of repos, look at examples of how they do this, because a lot of project repos have different ways of doing this as well. And you can reverse engineer this by looking at their contributing guides A, and looking at how they review PRs B. Those are two things you can look at, and they will give you a lot of insight into how they review.
okay. Thank you. If any one of you has any more questions, you can still drop it in the chat. Oh, I guess nobody has any more questions.
If you don't and you want to reach out later, that's something I can, you can do that. That's totally okay. What was my experience of contributing to open source? I work in open source for a living, so it's a little difficult for me to fine tune that to one conversation. If you have something specific, I can probably talk more about that.
Could you tell us like the best thing till now you find about open source and like
I love the people I work with, if I'm honest. Like I said, you never know who you're working with, where they're coming from, what experience you have. Like I was once chatting with a member of our community who was building with Appwrite, who was a doctor who was doing this out of their own time somewhere in Europe. And you never know where people are coming from and what they're doing, right? It's amazing, and it's fascinating to see where people come from. So I think the community and who contributes to these projects is one of my favorite aspects, because it always surprises you and you're always going to learn something somewhere from someone. What's a project that I worked on as a beginner? That's a good question. I don't know if I can fine tune that. I will say, as an absolute beginner, my first ever PR was into Free Code, one of Free Code Camp's Hacktoberfest initiatives, and I think what they did was created a really accessible way to get started. So lots of kudos to them for doing that. I'm gonna ask a question on this. Like, I get you're asking about my first contribution to open source, but why? You're like, how's that gonna help you? I mean, if you must know, it was probably some grammatical fixes or something. That's what it probably must have been. But is it really gonna help you? Is a question. Like, I'd ask questions that would help me. Knowing someone else's first contribution really isn't gonna help me. What can you say to those who are going to contribute for the first time? Treat this as a learning experience. That would be my priority. I mean, in fairness, a lot of what I said was for first time contributors. So I think that's what the talk was for. But one of my biggest things is just treat this as an opportunity to learn as much as you can. Whether it's through feedback, whether it's through the experience of actually building, whether it's through the people you're interacting with, every opportunity is an opportunity to learn.
Okay, so if nobody has any questions, let's wrap it up. Uh, Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your insights today. We are incredibly thankful to you. And I'd like to thank all the GDGs for collaborating and making this event possible. I'd also like to thank all of you for participating and making this event a huge success, for asking your questions, for being active. Thank you so much. And don't forget to contribute to Hacktoberfest and keep the open source spirit alive. Happy coding, everyone. You may now only. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for your time.
We'd love to have you at Amity as well one day.
And I'm always happy to join in. Let me know if we can ever do something of this sort again sometime. Like, I'm
Yeah,
always
sure.
happy to help out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Right.
Good night.
Good.
Bye.
Bye.
So you guys can now leave. Thank you so much for joining.